This week's US CQM Forecast Alert is: was it appropriate for the Fed to keep interest rate unchanged at its June 18 FOMC meeting? Comparing the updated monthly actual economic indicators with their ADIMA forecast, we can guess that the economic growth rate will be revised downward on both the expenditure and income side of the CQM forecast, as well as PCA forecast. As a result, the economic growth rate was revised downward to 1.66% on the expenditure side and 3.48% on the income side. The average economic growth rate on both the expenditure and income sides, which is a better measure of economic growth rate, was 2.56%. Although there is a slight downward trend in the economic growth rate, it can be said to be a solid economic growth rate of around 2.5%. All inflation indicators are stable on the 1% to 2% range, so there are no concerns about accelerating inflation. The PCA also revised down its economic growth rate to 2.05%, indicating a gradual downward trend, while inflation remained stable at between 1% and 2% in June. CQM and PCA forecast project economic growth in 2025 Q2 to be robust at 2% to 2.5%, with inflation stabilizing in the 1% to 2% range. Our difference with the Fed is that the economy is robust but shows signs of a gradual downward trend, and the Fed economists are more pessimistic about inflation. Looking only at the economy in 2025 Q2, it seemed to be reasonable to conclude that there is no need to rush to lower policy interest rates. Regarding economic growth forecast in 2025 Q3, CQM forecasts the economy will slow down significantly and even predict the possibility of negative growth. Although PCA forecasts do not predict negative growth, the economic growth rate is showing a downward trend, falling to 1.62%. Meanwhile, the inflation rate measured by the GDP price deflator has stabilized at around 2% and shows no signs of accelerating. Looking at the inflation situation for 2025 Q3 based on the CQM forecast, the inflation rate is on a downward trend and is currently at around 1.5%. In order to prevent an economic slowdown in 2025 Q3, it would have been appropriate to cut interest rate by 25 basis points to 50 basis points at the FOMC meeting on June 17 to 18. Conclusion from this week's US CQM Forecast Alert. The first, the economy is robust at about 2.5% in 2025 Q2, but is showing signs of a gradual downward trend. The second, inflation remains stable in the 1% to 2% range, with no signs of accelerating. The third, looking only at the economy in 2025 Q2, it seems reasonable that the Fed kept its policy interest rate unchanged at the FOMC meeting on June 17 to 18. The fourth, however, given the economic forecast for 2025 Q3, it would have been appropriate to cut interest rate by 25 basis to 50 basis points to prevent an economic slowdown in 2025 Q3. This slide contains additional information about this week's detailed CQM forecast.